allow for another company, another developer to use that login API endpoint to integrate it into their own application. So that wouldn't be possible if you didn't work there initially, but now since it allows for everyone to develop much faster, that is kind of the status quo right now. They are the building blocks of modern software. All right, so just a quick pulse check. What are some examples of APIs that you've come across now? And you've probably known that, oh yeah, I can get you the link too. But now we know that they are all over the place now. They're probably more around you than you thought initially. What are some examples of APIs that you've come across that you use all the time? Or if you're working with them, what APIs have you worked with and really liked recently? All right, yeah, OpenAI. I hear that one every single workshop. That is a really, really popular one. And if you like OpenAI, I highly recommend that you check out Hugging Face. That is another alternative that I like to use. It doesn't require a credit card, it requires a sign up, but it's very, very free. Oh, cool. Merriam-Webster's Dictionary for Words. I haven't even heard of that one. I want to use that for a project next. So thank you for letting me know about that. Any other ones that people are working on? Is anyone working on an API for their project in this hackathon? One good one for a beginner is a weather API, Spotify for music. Last hackathon, yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I'm actually going to show you Spotify in this workshop too, so I'm going to give you a glimpse of that one. All right, but thanks. Just to let you know, there's an API for almost about everything. You'll see a lot of these ones are the big popular ones. We have Twilio, we have weather APIs, as I mentioned, Stripe, Discord, Slack. If you've ever seen a Discord bot or a Slack bot, this is how they create them with their APIs. Facebook, Twitter, Spotify, Google, all the big names. And if you're ever in a rut and you're not sure what to really build that day, this is a pretty popular GitHub repository full of different public APIs. And let me make sure all of you can see this. This is indexed from everything from animals to weather. If I wanted to go to food and drink, there's everything here. There's different random pictures of coffee. And if I scroll to the very top, there were animals. There were like dog facts, cat facts. There are so many different public APIs. Typically, the issue with looking for APIs is that they're not public and typically they're pretty paid for. So the really cool ones are going to be paywalled. But this makes it really simple and eliminates that struggle to find an API you can work with. You can work with some really cool data here. All right, so now we're actually going to go in to see what Postman looks like. We're going to look at the UI, get a little accustomed to it, and I'm not going to explain everything of what's going on, but we're going to just look at Spotify in a real life example of what this API does. All right, so I am opening up my workspace and I'm working on, let me close this out. And this is what Postman looks like. So this is in dark mode, so it might not look like this for you. But you'll see a workspace is really just an organizational tool to hold different collections. What are collections? Great question. They're basically like folders. They hold different requests in them. And this is also another way to organize different requests, different endpoints, different pieces of data that we want to organize. So you'll see we have 5 different collections in here. We have one, which is the Formula One API, and you'll see there's documentation over here. And it's really organized. We'll have different folders here for different types of data that we want. So for example, if you wanted a list of drivers, you can find exactly that request. And when I say a request, each of these ones are requests within this folder. So again, this is a collection, the very top level. And within these ones, the individual folders will have requests. And then they're all folded in together into one big workspace. So looking back at the request, you'll see there's a couple different components. We're actually going to break down the anatomy of this later. So don't worry if all of this kind of looks like jumble to you. But let's see. Let's send this one, and that is called a request. By clicking that big blue button, we're actually going to get a response popped up on the bottom. And if this one doesn't load, because there's a lot of data being sent over to us, I'm going to show you the Spotify one too. And that might take a while. So while we're waiting for that one, let's go over to Spotify. This is a collection that I've created. And if you're wondering, where do you get all this information from? This is where you're going to be looking at. You're going to be looking at the documentation. And we're looking at web API specifically. There are different types of APIs, software and hardware API, but for this workshop specifically, we're going to be talking about web APIs. Now for Spotify, I think their documentation is prime. I always like using this as an example, but you can always go down to the reference and go down and kind of shop around for what you like. So like I mentioned before, it's kind of like a menu of options you can have. And let's say that I want get album or something like that. You'll be able to see exactly what you need to input on your request. It'll actually give you a sample of what you should have and the response and how you're expecting the data to be formatted in. It'll explain everything over here too. But let's come back over here. Now we know where we're getting these requests from. Let's assume that I just already pulled this. I'm going to set my environment variables, but don't worry about all that. I'm just going to show you what the request and response looks like here. So I'm going to say I want the get artist request, and I'm going to send this button. And I forgot to authorize. Authorization is, this one is a little bit more tricky, so we need to actually refresh the token. This is, all right, bear with me for a second. I haven't auto-refreshed it. All right. Never mind, this one is, I forgot to auto-refresh it and I don't feel like I want to take the time out from this workshop to do that again. So let's go over here and back to the Formula One. All right. And it says 503 backend fetch failed. All right. So none of these just wanted to work. All right. Let's do the basic one. Okay, trivia won't fail me. All right, so we have this one. All right, sorry about that minor technical difficulty. We'll try to get that fixed before the next example. But here's an example of a request. This is a trivia collection, so it's a really simple one. We're hitting an endpoint to get trivia questions, and on the bottom here, we're going to get a response that says 200 okay. And we're actually getting back this body of questions. So we'll have an array of different types of questions, and they'll all be represented by different JSON bodies. So you'll see this one has a question of what is the powerhouse of the cell. It'll describe the correct answer and the incorrect answers, and we'll have a ton of different questions like that. All right, so coming back to this, let's talk about why we use Postman in the first place. So to give you a little bit of context, there are two ways to really make API requests. On the left-hand side, you'll see curl commands, and that is done in the terminal. You'll see it's not that readable. You definitely can make sense of it, and people do it all the time. But it is a little bit more difficult, and to make collaboration happen on a team where you're sending out multiple requests, it's just really inconvenient for everyone involved. You can't save requests. It's also very difficult to edit them once they're in the terminal. This is where Postman comes in and really alleviates all those pain points. You can read it really well. We have it in a tabular format for query parameters, and you can save these all in collections, workspaces, and share them with your teammates. All right, so let's talk about what's going on behind the scenes. What did those status codes mean, and what was that happening when we did the request and the response and things weren't working out? All right, so let's talk about the really famous analogy of APIs, which is a digital restaurant. The digital restaurant works out with three different characters in this analogy. So we have one, which is the user. We have the API, which is the server. And we also have the chef, who is the backend. So let's say I'm the user. I'm going to call over the waiter and I want to order a French onion soup. So I'm looking at the menu. I'm confirming there's a French onion soup on the menu. And the waiter is actually going to take that back over to the chef, and the chef is going to cook up the French onion soup. Before the chef can do that, the chef is going to check if there's enough resources and if we have the right tools for it. So the chef is going to make sure, okay, let's see if we have enough onions. Let's see if I have the knives needed. Let's see if I need the pot. So the chef is going to confirm all of those things. It's going to cook up the French onion soup, and then it's going to pass it over once it's done to the waiter. The waiter then passes it on over to me, and this whole transaction of this request for the soup and getting back the soup after it's being cooked is called the request response pattern. And the way that it works is that our API, the server, is the middleman between both me as the user and also the backend as the chef. And this is done on more of a technical setting. So you'll see that the client is known as the user. The client can be anything that you're calling the request from. And this can be Postman in this case, since we're calling requests from Postman itself, but this can be a browser or an application. And the API is seen as the server again, and then the API server is the chef. All right, so let's dig a little bit deeper and let's look at our requests and responses. We're going to go through the anatomy of each of these, and we're going to go through the method, the endpoint path, the parameters, the headers, and the body. So for the bare minimum for a request, you don't need all of those things that I mentioned before, but you do need a method and an endpoint as the bare minimum for any request. And you'll see this is broken down into two parts. On the left-hand side, you've probably noticed all of our requests so far have been gets, and this is retrieving information. So the most popular methods are going to follow CRUD, which is a really popular pattern, which is create, read, update, and delete. So we have post, which is sending information over to our server, put and patches for updating information on the server, and delete is for deleting information. So other than that, we have the endpoint, which is the address of the server that we're really referring to and trying to get data from. And more specifically, this is broken up into three parts. We have the protocol, we have the host, and we also have the path. Now, if you want to narrow down your response results, let's use parameters. So you can use two types of parameters here. We have query parameters, and we also have path parameters. The main difference between these are that query parameters are going to be used as they're going to be used as key value pairings, and you're going to have to look at the documentation to see what kind of fields you can query for. So in this case, in this example, it's not always going to be queue and orientation that you can always look for and add fields or add properties for, but you'll see that they're starting with a question mark and they're separated by ampersands. But the cool thing about Postman is that you actually don't need to worry about the syntax so much. You have a table that you can just fill in the key and values and it'll input it automatically for you. Same thing with the path parameters. This one is more dynamic, so we'll see it in Spotify a lot. So any real API, you'll see a value for IDs. And this is coming after a slash instead of a question mark. So if you ever need to identify, is this a query parameter or a path parameter, you can always identify it by the question mark or a slash. And the meat of the request, this is the request body. It's also known as the data payload. This is optional, but it's always used or almost always used with post, put, and patch requests. You'll see an example of a JSON body, which is what we're going to be using in this example. A lot of the times is on the right-hand side. JSON is a really lightweight way of sending over data to the server. And you'll see that it's just separated by colons, each field. So you'll see name, Jane Doe, separated by a comma, and then email, janedoe.email.com. And that is how we're going to be parsing our responses. But they come in all different types of data types. So we have form data, JSON, text, HTML, GraphQL even, and other files. And then we have headers. So headers are for metadata. If you don't know what metadata is, it's like data about data. And a great way to think about it is the information on the outside of an envelope. So it's not containing any information about what's inside the letter, but more so about where it's going, where it's from, all that good stuff. You'll see some common standard headers here are authorization, cookie, content type, accept, user agent. But really, you can always Google those at the time. It's not really that important to know what they do exactly at this moment. But these are all key value pairs, again, for non-payload information. Now we're going to dive into a response. And the response is where we're going to be getting all of our data that we want. Or in the case of an error, we're going to get status codes and messages that say that we're having an issue. So to start off, we have status codes. You've probably seen all the basics. You've probably seen 200 OK. You've probably seen 404 not found and 503 maybe. But what you didn't know is that they're all categorized. So we have 200s, which are your good ones. We have 200 successes, and we have 300s, which are the redirections. They're not as common. 400s client error. So if you run into this during this course, you're probably running into something like 400 bad requests, unauthorized. Are you allowed to use the API that you're accessing? Did you even add an authentication method? 400s are pretty vague. It can be anything from you use the wrong data type in your body, or you have the wrong URL. All right, and then 500s are server errors. For this course, it doesn't really affect your testing right now, but just for your knowledge, it is all for your servers. Internal errors, bad gateways, gateway timeouts, you've probably run into that one a lot. And if you ever forget about which one it is, Postman does a really great job of making sure you can hover over it and just make sure that you get a really great description of it. All right, so now we're going to transition into demoing this API. So our team has actually made an in-house API to kind of demonstrate in public library, sorry. So we have a public library API, and it's going to have a ton of different books that students have added throughout the years, and we have it set up to delete on a 3-day rolling basis right now. So I'm going to show you all of the different requests of the CRUD method. So we're going to do a get request, we're going to do a post request, we're going to do a delete request, and a patch request. And then we're going to do some with IDs specifically. So if you want to follow along, make sure that you have Postman downloaded. You can have either the browser application or the desktop application. Either one works, but for right now, I'm going to be using the browser application. And you can just go to postman.com for that. And I'm going to just do this along with you. So make sure that you open up Postman and type in Postman library API v2. And you can do that at the very top bar. And before we do that, actually, I realize a lot of you don't have your first workspace, so we're going to do that first, actually. So let's go over to workspaces and let's go over to create a workspace. And you can find that at the top left corner. Just create workspace, and we want a blank workspace for right now. So let's get a blank workspace, click on next, and you can name this whatever you want. I'm going to name this just demo, and what is it? Oh, it's March 1st, all right. I'm going to call it demo 3.1, and you're just going to create it. Once you get that, you're going to have a completely blank workspace. It's going to say add a collection or create a collection for your request, but we actually don't need to do that just yet. We're going to do something called forking it. So it's similar to what you've probably known. It is really similar to GitHub's forking. We're just going to be taking someone's collection and transferring it into our workspace so we can use it. So this is where we're actually going to search up Postman Library API v2. And you're going to see that if we open this up, we can't do anything. We can't send the requests. It's all locked. So we want to fork this over to our own workspace so we can actually manipulate it. Yes, you do actually have to be signed in to Postman to create a workspace. So you'll have to make your own account, but hopefully it doesn't take that long. And you can use the browser application, so you don't have to download anything else. Yeah, but I'll take a minute just so that everyone can get on the same page. So let's see if everyone has a workspace available. And then you searched up Postman Library API v2, which I'll actually just make sure I can send out the link here, just so that it's a little bit easier for everyone in the Zoom chat. Is Postman agent on the ARU? So you don't actually need Postman agent for this course right now. This one, I don't know if it's on ARU. Let me see. I think we don't. Yeah. Okay. You can download Postman agent, but for right now, you don't need it right now. This demo, you won't need it, but in general, if you're using the browser application, you will need to use Postman agent for future use. But glad you found it. All right, so once everyone has this up, we have the Postman Library API workspace and everyone's on that site, then we can keep going. All right, so hopefully you have your workspace. Hopefully we have this workspace up and we're looking at the same collection, which is Postman Library API v2 docs. While everyone's getting set up, I'm just going to go through and read the documentation because that's the first place we should be looking always with APIs. All right, so let's start looking at this. Manage books in the Postman library using this API. This is a non-permanent collection books are automatically deleted on the rolling basis, which I was telling you about. And it's just going to tell us a little bit about the API itself. So we have permanent collection books. This is going to have a field that says is permanent collection. It's going to be true or false. And we're going to be authorizing requests for post, patch, and delete requests. So keep this in mind for later. We're going to need to set an API key in the collection variables to the value Postman rules later. This is a really simple example of API keys. In the real world, there's going to be more complex authorization, like we saw with Spotify, that was using OAuth 2.0, I believe. So there's a lot of different dances you can do with API authorization. And this is just to give you a taste of how you would set this up in Postman. So we're going to be demoing that. And then also, this is a public API, so make sure that whenever we're modifying books or we're deleting books, just make sure you're modifying your own. All right, so now everyone's hopefully here. We're going to go over to the 3 dots on this collection. And whenever I'm referring to the collection and I'm saying, oh, I want to do something in the collection, I'm really saying click on the top level of this folder. And for right now, we're going to click on View More Actions on the 3 dots on the right. And I'm going to say Create a Fork. Now I'm going to keep the fork label just as is, my name's fork, and then also making sure that we put it in the correct workspace. And I'm putting it in demo 3.1. And you can keep it as watch original collection. And I'm going to click fork. All right, so now we should be redirected to our original workspace, the one that we have created ourselves. And we can double check that by making sure that this is the one that we named ourselves. And then we should have the copy of the collection that we just forked. All right, so once we click on this, we now have access to all of these different requests. And I'm just going to give you an example. And if you're following along, we're just going to run all of these different commands. So we have the basic one, which is get books, and I'm just going to show you this one first. We also have another folder for ID, which is getting or doing requests with a specific ID. So we have a get request, a patch request, and a delete request in here. Now let's make our first API request. Let's go through and just kind of manipulate this. So first, let's look at the request here. We have a variable. This orange highlighted section here is actually how we handle variables in Postman. So if you hover over it, you'll actually see that this is going to represent HTTPS library-api.postmanlabs.com. And it's in the collection scope. How do I edit this? For your knowledge, if you ever want to edit a variable, which we will have to do later, you can always go up to the collection level and hit variables on this tab. You'll see that we have the variable base URL here. You can set up any other one if you'd like. And we have the values set up here. And just a reminder, if you ever make an edit to any of your requests, just to always make sure you're saving it too, just because Postman doesn't autosave. All right, so now you'll see that that base URL is just the host and the protocol attached together, but we left out the path itself at the end. And this is just to reduce redundancy. We don't want to keep repeating ourselves because all of these are going to use the same base URL, maybe with just different endpoints or different paths. So we're just going to shorten it down. We're going to use a variable and just kind of keep it simple. And you'll see right now there are different query parameters we can use, but we're not going to use any of them right now. Let's just send it and see what we get. And you'll see we actually get back a 200 OK. And there are a ton of different books in here. We'll see I Am Number 3, Mistborn, To Kill a Mockingbird. We have a lot of To Kill a Mockingbirds because that is the example. And Romeo and Juliet, and lots more. So these are all the books that are alive in the library right now. But this is your chance to actually write your own book. We're going to be adding our own book in a second. But for right now, I just want to show you how to add query parameters too. The cool thing about Postman is that we have a table for query parameters to make it super simple for us. And since we forked this collection, we can actually see what query parameters we are allowed to use. Normally you would look at the documentation and see what we can use, but right now we can actually just really easily check it off. So let's check off genre, and we want to look for fiction books, and we want to look for books that are not checked out. If I save this and I send it, you'll see that it automatically narrows it down for us, and every single book here will be not checked out and fiction. And just to prove that this works, we can actually do something that's a little bit more niche, and let's do self-help. It's as easy as just replacing the value there, and now we can actually go through here, some other book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, the 5 agreements, the 4 agreements, yeah, all that good stuff. All right, so that is get books. That is an example of your first basic get request. All right, so now let's move on to actually doing your first post request. So this is different as we're using the same request URL, but we're using a different method this time. So now this time we're going to be sending data over the server, and we're going to have to add a body. So we already have a body pre-filled for us because we forked the collection. But this time we wanted to make sure that we're not adding another repeat. Let's actually just change the values of everything in here to a book that we're currently reading. So does someone have a book that they're currently reading off the top of their head, just a title and author that I can input here? And if you're doing it on your own, make sure that you're adding your own book so we can see everyone's books right now. Oh, so we got a real CS kid here. So we have designing, data intensive. Okay, data intensive. Oh, I heard the 3 body problem is really good. I heard there was also a Netflix thing coming out for it, but haven't read it yet. But since I'm already committed to this one, we're going to do the designing data intensive applications, which sounds very interesting. Martin Klebman. All right, and I think it technically counts as self-help, but we're going to just say educational. And your publish doesn't really matter. No one's really looking at it. So let's see. Thank you for that suggestion. Let's save that. And we see that this is a raw JSON body in the format that I showed you in the example. And let's just see what happens when we send this. And surprise, surprise, we get a 401 unauthorized actually. And this API is really helpful because we get a message saying exactly what's going wrong. And you'll see that this one includes that if you didn't know what 401 unauthorized meant, it means that we're missing invalid credentials. So we're missing credentials. So let's take a look at our authorization, see what we're missing right here. And you'll see that we have an API key here, and we have a value of API key. And if we hover over our variable, it's actually blank. So let's go back on over to our variables up here. And if you remember correctly from our documentation, we actually need to add Postman rules here as that value. And I got that straight from the documentation. So you'll notice that I'm adding this in current value and not initial value, and that is for a very good reason. Whenever you're working with sensitive data in Postman, we always want to keep it in current value. When other people fork your collection, they won't have a value pre-filled for them, exposing all of your secrets. So anything that's sensitive, always in current value. All right, so let's go back over here. Let's hover over API key, and we'll see that it successfully saved the variable. Now we're adding it to the header, and then let's send this, and we get a 201 created. So that's really great. Now we know that this book is in our library for at least 3 days. So if you don't believe me, you can always run this request again. We're actually going to run the get books, and I want to take out the query parameters. And you'll see this one has been added on top, on the very top of the pile of the library. All right, now let's go back and let's see. So we're gonna kind of dissect this JSON body. So we'll notice that we only added a few fields here. So we only added a title, author, genre, and year published, but it tacked on a few more things. So it tacked on an ID, first of all. It tacked on checked out is equal to false, is permanent collection is false, and then created out, which is the timestamp of when it was created. So this idea is going to come in handy for us now. So we actually want to just copy this, and we're going to use this later in our ID section over here, where we're going to do our patch and delete requests. Let's actually go over to our variables up here just to save us time. And just as an example of how to add a new variable, we're going to say, okay, I want to add my ID here. And this is the ID of my book. So I'm going to add this in current value and I'm going to save it. All right. So let's go to get a book by ID. This is the most basic one. We see there's a difference here. So there's a little bit of a difference here. Instead of just /books with this one, get books, the most basic one, now we have another slash and a colon ID. And this is a great way of just adding a path variable, which we can update here. Now we're going to access our variable that we created before, and I'm going to just use the curly braces, the double curly braces, and just confirm that that is working like we expect. Now we don't have anything else. We're just doing a get request, so we don't need a body, but we're just looking for the specific book. And this should return the exact same book, Designing Data-Intensive Applications. Now let's do something a little bit more interesting. Let's say that we want to check out the book. Now we have the same request URL, but now we're using a patch request where we can actually update our book. And I'm just going to make sure that we have ID here saved again. This is the exact same path variable, and we need authorization for this again. Since we set up authorization in the collection variable, we can actually say that we're just setting up the same thing. We have the same key, we have the same value, and we forked it like this so we don't have to do a lot. So let's go to the body. And you'll see that this is pre-filled out for us to already check out a book. We can change this to any other property really, and it'll work. But for right now, we want to check out the book. So we can actually take the property checked out, make sure that we're setting it to a compatible data type, which this is a Boolean, so we can either choose true or false. We're going to change it from false to true now. So let's save this and let's check it out. Let's send it, and now we can actually see that this is updated by saying checked out is true. And you can also change this to any other property. If I wanted to say year published, and let's say that this came out in like 2001 or something, I saved it, that will also update this. So you can really change it to any other property, and that is going to update part of this response body. All right, so let's go on to the last one, the very, very last one. Your book has probably run its life cycle, and we're going to just delete it. So same request URL, we're going to do a delete method, and we have the same authorization setup. Hover over it just to confirm that we're okay, and then no body. So let's just make sure that this is the right ID, save it, and let's send it. And this time we get no content response. We have a 204 no content, there's 0 response. Does this mean it worked? A 204 is successful, and that is the expected behavior we're looking for. So we are not expected to see any type of response. So we can assume that this is correct. But if you don't believe it, we can always go back to get a book by ID, and you'll remember that this ID refers back to that one, designing data-intensive applications. This was the previous response we had. And if we send it again, we'll see that it's not found. So it actually successfully deleted, and if we get the books again, we're back to seeing nothing up here anymore. All right, so that is an example of all of the different CRUD methods. You've done a GET request, a POST request, a patch request, and a delete request. So these should be all of your bases covered. Obviously, this is a very, very basic example of using Postman with the different API requests. But if you go back and you do the certification, we talk about a lot more advanced requests, and we also cover scripting, which is really cool with collections. Now, you're probably wondering, Postman is great to test APIs, but how do I really transfer that knowledge into working with it in coding? And that's where code generation and code snippets really come in handy. So we have this feature in Postman, which is called Code Snippet. And this is available for any type of request. If you go over to the right-hand side on the symbol, you'll actually see a pop-up that will basically translate your entire request into code, where you can actually access the request, and then you can get the response and you can handle the data from there. And just as an example of that, let's see. So if we wanted to do anything like this, if we wanted to go onto the right-hand side, this isn't a curl request, but if I wanted to do something like fetch, JavaScript fetch, it'll actually do all of this. It'll set up the headers, it'll add the authorization if there's any. This is a really bad example because this is a super simple API, but for other APIs where it's a little bit more complicated, it'll add all of your headers, all of your other options. the method will be added and it'll just make the request for you, leaving only the response there for you to handle. And there's tons of different languages for you to use. So if you're ever in time crunch and you want some inspiration of how to do this, I highly recommend that you just start off with that and plug it into your code and see where to go. And if you want to start building your first full stack application, we have our project-based learning module out right now. You can access it using the same link to access the certification, which I'll show you in a second. But this is a really great project. It'll really take you through building a Node.js Express application and using the Hugging Face API to make a text summarizer application, which you can see on the right-hand side. And as I mentioned before, you can continue learning as a student. You can always scan this QR code to learn more. We do a lot more in this course. I really only scratched the surface with collections, but collections are very, very powerful tools. You can also do lots of test scripting there. So if you want to access it, it is at this link. And let me see if I can just type it out here. HTTP tinyurl.com/postman blueprint. And you can also scan the QR code. But we have tons of other resources available too. We have YouTube playlists where we have tons of people go on live, and then they also build projects there too with APIs. We have a really active forum, and we also have a really great Discord community. If you're looking for a community, we announce lots of giveaways there. We have hackathons. All of our announcements are there. So if you want to join, you always feel free to. This is the QR code for this one as well. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining and taking time out of your day to attend this. Definitely feel free to leave feedback here. And for the swag challenge, if you all want to do the swag challenge, I highly recommend that you do it. If anyone's going to do the certification, you might as well get some swag out of it too. My email is going to be lillian.nose@postman.com. And you have 1 week to do it, so that's plenty of time. Don't feel free to do it after the hackathon too. You have time to do it. So email me at lillian.nose@postman.com with your badge, and I will reward you with some swag codes. All right, but thank you guys. I'm gonna send these slides in this chat actually if you want it, and you can always look over the actual notes there too. But here you go. And yeah, thank you everyone for attending. It was great. And if you have any questions about this or any of the content, you can always use my email to message me there too.
Thank you so much. I personally learned a lot, and I'm sure like a lot of the students did as well.
Awesome. Oh, and sorry about the access. I'm sharing it right now. Whoops. All right, awesome. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for MIT Blueprint for hosting. It's been really great.